What is the proper role for security leadership to play? Today we sit down with Matthew Rosenquist, a CISO at Mercury Risk, a board advisor, keynote speaker, a top LinkedIn voice on cybersecurity, a pragmatic cybersec leader and strategist like no other. We talk about the role of security leadership, the cultural differences between the US and the UK on data privacy, the importance of choosing trustworthy vendors, the importance of data privacy, how to reduce risks from nation-state attacks, and how to reduce risks from zero-day exploits. This is the story of Matthew Rosenquist and the role of security leadership. Come join us as we go behind the scenes of today's most notorious cybercrime. Every time we get online, we enter their world. So we provide true storytelling to raise awareness, interviewing global leaders making an impact and improving our world, translating cybersecurity into everyday language that's practical and easy to understand. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast by downloading our episodes on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. Well, welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I am your host, David Morrow, and in the studio today is my always technologically adventure and sidekick, Mark Mosher. Mark, how are you, man?
I'm wonderful, David. For those that didn't pick up the tongue-in-cheek reference, maybe watching other episodes, I tend to have some, what do they call them back in your day, David? Gremlins in the system, right? That's what it is. David, Absolutely. We have got a great show today. I am really excited about this. Tell the listeners and the YouTube channel viewers who's in the studio with us today.
We have the legendary Matthew Rosenquist, formerly with Intel, now CISO at Mercury Risk, a pragmatic cybersecurity leader and strategist, a board advisor, keynote speaker, and a top voice on LinkedIn. Matthew, welcome to the studio.
And coffee drinker. I drink a lot of coffee. Add
yeah,
that.
See, and for a small fee, Matthew, we can introduce you on all virtual meetings in just such a form.
Just bring us along before we Zoom. Before we Zoom, we will just be like, and now Matthew Rosenquist joins you.
Talk about making an impact right out of the gate, right?
Anything you need, man.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to having a fruitful, productive, exciting chat with you gentlemen. Let's talk some interesting things about cybersecurity today.
So let's talk about your origin story. So,
you knew he was going to go there. You knew first pitch.
Matthew had a stellar career. Check him out on LinkedIn. He has like several 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. And when we were preparing for today, I was like, well, I always want to know how people broke into cybersecurity. He's like, I don't want to talk about me. I don't want to talk about that. That's boring. But I do think that some people find it interesting. So just generally for 2 seconds, in a pragmatic way, just share with us kind of how, like, what, like when you were a kid, were you like, I'm going to learn how to hack computers and protect people from hackers? Like what was it?
Okay. I'll give you the short version, right?
There, that's
and I've been doing this. I've been in security for 35 years. So when I started, there was no such thing as cybersecurity.
No,
there was no such thing as information security.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Back in the day, they talked about system security, and it all originated from mainframes. So that tells you how far I go back. But originally when I started in this, actually, I started not in the cyber information aspect. It was doing internal investigations for theft, fraud, and things of that sort.
Okay.
And the thing that I loved about it was that intelligent adversary. Somebody is doing something and trying to get away with it, and I have to figure out what's going on, detect that that's happening, figure out who it is, and then be able to gather enough information and evidence to arrest and prosecute. So that adversarial nature, I love that game, if you will, right? And it's how good are you versus how good they are. And so I love that. And I'd always been a geek. I loved computers, technology, programming, all that stuff. So it then came to an intersection when I joined Intel. Funny story, the company didn't have a security operations center, right? This was very, very, very early on. Wow. And there had been several proposals up to the board. Center. Right, to say, hey, we need this, and they were shot down. And I had a great manager at the time, and I was very junior. But at Intel at the time, it didn't matter. It was just who was the best, right? And so my manager came up to me and said, hey, I know you do security investigations. You want to propose a security operations center? I said, sure. So I went off and drafted, 14-page, proposal and business justification, everything else, and submitted. And he came back to me a couple of weeks later and he says, hey, congratulations. They agreed to your proposal. Whoa. And I'm like, right. And I felt that was a huge feather in my cap. That's great. And I'm like, what idiot did you get to manage it? You. And he starts laughing. And he said, they wanted you. Junior, I'm not. They're like, you were the one that explained it to them in a way they could understand and get behind. They want you. Yep. So here's enough rope to go hang yourself, either succeed or fail. And that's, that was the kind of big step for me is I was able to then bring together, it was about a 34-person team, the first SOC, and build it out, manage it, and off I went. And from there it was just something new, the next impossible challenge. Once I got something in stable world class, it was okay, now what can't be solved next? And I want to go do that in cybersecurity.
Well, that's a great story.
That helps your audience zero.
You gave inspiration to those
they should
that
just jump ahead to right now when we're going to talk about good, interesting things.
Okay, well, that is a good story, though, and I am glad I asked because that was a lot better than my dad was a, engineer, and I learned it from him. I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. Like, I always like the people that came from I was a barber and then I became a CISSP. I'm like, how did that happen? Anyway, so let's talk 0 days. So for non-technical people. And business leaders, right? Because you are so good at translating complex into impact in business terms. Walk us through what 0 days are and why they pose such a big risk today. Because we're seeing them in the news from Snowflake to Move It to a lot of different things all over the news, and they're leading to some of the largest breaches, and they're really long standing. They go on for months and months and years and years.
Yeah. 0 days are actually really easy to understand. All it is it's an unknown vulnerability in a system of sorts. So it can be a technical vulnerability. It can be a process vulnerability. But it's one that isn't widely known or hasn't really been discovered. And that's why they say 0 days. There's 0 days since it's been discovered. So if you're an attacker, it's like finding a secret back door that gets you what you want. If you discover this before the defense, the cybersecurity team even knows it's there, right, you can exploit it and you have free reign for whatever that particular 0 day does. Now, once you do that, you do use that exploit, then eventually people are going to realize, hey, there's something wrong here. Somebody's inside the castle and yet the gate is closed. There must be another door, right? They must be getting in. And then they go on the hunt for it and try and figure it. And as soon as they find it, they then have the opportunity to close it. And your window of opportunity as an attacker, poof, goes away. But until that happens, that window of opportunity is supremely valuable. And that's why there's an entire market for 0 days. Very smart security researchers, or hackers, if you will, depending on their motivation, will go out and, take a look at software or programs or infrastructure or hardware or firmware, right? And can't forget operating systems. But
right.
they look at all these different things and try and figure out a vulnerability that nobody knows. And then they have a choice. They can sell it to the highest bidder, and in most cases, that's somebody that's going to use it maliciously. Or they may try and go back to that manufacturer as part of a bug bounty program. This is what we would call an ethical security researcher. Go back to them and say, hey, I've discovered something in your product or whatever it is. I can give you the details. And many times they're recognized, they're financially rewarded, and they build up a good reputation. These things play a huge
smart business
impact on our
move.
industry.
Yeah, it's a smart business move for a manufacturer or a software developer to reward bug bounty programs. In fact, I see a lot of software platforms that actually advertise that we have an active, ongoing bug bounty program.
It's best practice nowadays.
Yeah, it really is.
Originally, it was not that way, by the way. Originally, it was, if you inspected my software, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to put a gag order on you. And all these bad things. And we were screaming to the industry going, you are insulting and impacting your best possible resource. These independent researchers could sell it for a lot more, but they're willing to share it with you for a lot less. Why are you harming them?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Here's my question. Why are we seeing, it seems like we are seeing more of them in the last couple years than previously? Is that because there aren't necessarily S-bombs on products? Like there's no like a software bill of materials like a cereal box that has all the ingredients, so this one has red dye number 3, better not eat it. Is it because certain platforms lack that, and then they're just cutting and pasting from prior code that could be vulnerable? Is that what's happening? Possibly?
Nope. Okay,
First
first off, you're absolutely right. The number of 0 days and the severity of those 0 days being discovered is skyrocketing. And this is something that we've predicted, and we're predicting it will continue to get much worse. Now, it really comes down, to business. Think about it. Innovation, which is really what discovering 0 days is, right? It's trying to identify that. That takes time and effort and resources and tools and expertise. But the thing is, that costs, again, time, money, effort, and to attract people to do that, right, there has to be a lot of incentive. Well, we saw original 0 days come out, and they would sell them for a few $1,000s, right? So you would spend as a researcher all this time, money, effort, tools, have to create your own tools, and then be able to sell it for a few $1,000s. And everybody thought, wow, that was pretty good. And then the organized cyber criminals said, well, if you can do it to this platform, I'll pay tens of thousands. People's minds were blown. Okay. And so it started to evolve. And then there was some competition. Well, I'll pay more than tens. We saw some come out at hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Whoa.
Yes.
But that fundamentally all changed when we saw aggressive nation states about a decade ago come on the scene. And we're not talking about, high-end organized criminals that are willing to spend $100,000 on a vulnerability to, get inside of a bank. We're talking about a nation state that can throw around billions of dollars into research and expertise and tool development.
And just pure manpower, right? I
Right.
mean, they just have
Yeah.
24/7 tiers of staffs that
And
just
they're
go
willing to pay millions of dollars. We've seen them up to $20 million for a single exploit, right? And that's the starting negotiation price. That's to get your attention. So now you have entire organizations, clubs, and in some cases, business organizations intentionally going out to go after that. And so as you flood the market with research funds, right, it's an economic cycle to say, hey, these people are going to go look for more, right? And then you have the support infrastructure to say, well, we're going to develop tools for these people and sell them the tools, right? So you have a whole economy that's coming behind this. Why? Because there is money to be made. And
Well,
nation states are the ones just pouring gasoline on the fire.
why do you think nation states began doing that around 10 years ago? What did it have to do with the decentralization, the collapse of the USSR? Is it has to do with national security, international political relations where there's sanctions, and then they can't get money from America one way, so they go after and target American businesses another way?
It's asymmetric warfare, right? When you look at those aggressive nation states. Now, keep in mind, every nation out there, big and small, has some type of cyber program.
Right.
But, we classify aggressive nation states as the ones that are developing technology and going after other countries in an aggressive way, typically for either political purposes, to push foreign policy, to get around sanctions, things of that sort, or sway democracies, voting, people, perceptions, all those kinds of things, right? And they have very, very active professional organizations that do this. And then they also subcontract with private organizations, criminal organizations, and everything else. So there are many motivations when you look at this, but the same thing is, why does a country have a military? Right? It's to push foreign policy, or to protect itself, or to undermine a growing adversary, or, to influence something else. Cyber is just another tool in the toolbox. And from an expense perspective, it's really cheap.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
the trend is everybody is moving to digital. All your critical infrastructure, every critical infrastructure sector out there has a dependency on digital technology. So there are tremendous opportunities, right, to achieve all those goals, or at least contribute to all those goals that a country may have. So we've seen it all over the place. And the big four, truly aggressive nation states out there, they're billions of dollars, and they're actually behind a lot of the attacks that you see today in the news.
Either ratifying after, or looking the other way, or funding it.
It tends to be a combination of different things, and there's been an evolution. And I'll pick on one, right? Russia is considered one of the big four, right?
Yep.
Russia, prior to 2022, actually outsourced a lot of their cyber attacks, and they were doing things, political things, social, changing social opinions within different countries. They were stealing money. They were doing all sorts of things, stealing secrets. They were, adding and helping their international espionage, right, to be able to gather data, turn information, all those kinds of things. So they were doing lots of stuff, but a lot of it was outsourced. And then in 2022, when they invaded Ukraine, they had a massive campaign ready.
They did.
And it shifted from a lot of, ransomware and I'm going to steal your information, and actually shifted to a wiper kind of malware, which is highly destructive. And they targeted Ukraine. They targeted a few other things, especially as allies, stepped up. But they figured, okay, this is going to be great. What they didn't count on is a lot of those kind of subcontractors they had were Ukrainian. And, they had thought, well, hey, criminals are criminals. If I pay them money, they'll do whatever I ask. They won't care. Well, as it turns out, if you shell and bomb even a hacker's grandmother's house, their babushka, right? They don't care the money, right? And they're doing it themselves because they learned their lesson. So, it just, the business cycles kind of change, but it's big business. It's really important. And we're seeing right now critical infrastructures being the primary targets for all aggressive nation states out there, the big four.
Yep.
Yeah. And when a 0 day gets exploited, it just spreads like wildfire, because it seems like they're finding them for the tools that organizations use across thousands of organizations. So once they find it, they are inside all of these organizations.
Yeah, you're talking supply chain, which is, think of it as a force amplifier, right? If I find a 0 day, and by the way, if you're in the business, you can put in an order request. You just say, hey, I want a 0 day admin access remotely capable for Windows 11. or for the latest version of the iPhone, right? You can put these orders in and then put a bounty on it. But
and these are all sold like on marketplaces, on the dark.
Absolutely. On the dark web and on the gray web as well. There are legitimate businesses who will deal with this and be that middleman to keep a certain level of anonymity on both sides of the equation. They take their cut, so they're kind of in a gray zone as well. But yes, and again, tens of millions of dollars per exploit in some cases. But, these governments, they can say, hey, I want to just attack you, right? I want an exploit for company XYZ, right? Acme Rockets, let's say.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's all great. You may get that exploit. You may be able to get into Acme Rockets. But it makes a whole lot more sense to instead go to this other company, maybe an IT company, that has a whole bunch of customers, including Acme Rockets, and say, give me an exploit into this IT company that services all these others, so that I will use them as a staging ground to impact every single one of their customers that I want.
And
we've seen this many times.
Things like that, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's your supply chain attacks, which is, again, it amplifies the stakes because one attack can compromise thousands of downstream customers.
So what can business owners do? I mean, really, all they can do is just bolster their defenses, in my mind. Like, just have security layers in place, because if somebody's going to exploit a 0-day on a platform that their IT service provider is using, how's a business owner supposed to protect themselves for that?
Yeah.
Well, internally, you're right. They should have a good, well thought out plan and execute to that strategy to protect everything within their borders. But in today's environment, we have so many suppliers and vendors, right? Right now, we're on a third-party video supplier, right? So you're using that. Do you use cloud, right? Do you use Google, or Microsoft is now all online, right? So you've got all these connected and manages our security and is very responsible if something happens to let you know and get on it quick to close that 0-day quickly. And they have a reputation like that. That's who you want to be with. Absolutely. If on the other hand, you have a vendor maybe a little less pricey, but they don't have such a good reputation, right? They've had some data breaches. They've had some exploits. They were a little slow in telling people until it was actually exposed by another party. And then they said, oh, well, yeah, that happened, right? A little less trustworthy. You don't really know where your data is. They're not being audited. They're not certified. All those kinds of things. Well, you're probably getting what you're paying for. You're paying less. But understand the ramifications to your business, your customers, and everybody that you service, including your partners and your insurance and everything else, if you choose to go down that path. So act smart. It's just like any other business decision. You choose who your business partners are. You choose who your suppliers and vendors are. You need to have that same level of fiduciary care when choosing your digital and security partners.
Excellent insight. It still blows my mind how many American businesses do not have updated like incident response plan, don't run table sizes. And I'm like, how do you not? I mean, to me, a lot of organizations are going to get breached, but they're not all equal. Like, there are some that are an inconvenience. It costs money. It's repaired, but it's not a torpedo that makes the ship sink, right? And there are some that absolutely torpedo an organization's brand. And to me, I'm always just boggles my mind how some organizations, they just don't even prepare for the day of a breach. I mean, to me, that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
It's getting better, though. I have to say, and especially for the critical infrastructure, when we look over 10, 15 years, it is getting better. But you kind of have to go back to the first axiom of cybersecurity, which is very telling, right? It simply is cybersecurity is not relevant until it fails. So you have a lot of these organizations going, well, you know, we didn't have any problems yesterday. We're probably
who used to be
going,
just
it's
a
your
network
fault.
guy. Yeah, he used to be just a network guy, but because he does technology, they're like security guy now.
Yeah, you do security too. I know you're a network engineer, but now you're our security engineer. Congratulations. You know, so again, you have to have good leadership. That's really one of the most important things. And when I go out and I talk with a lot of boards and I get brought in by a lot of CEOs and so forth to evaluate what's going on, one of the biggest determining factors in understanding the maturity level of that organization, security leadership. Yeah, do they have somebody that actually has a background, that has experience, that has knowledge, that can communicate sometimes these kind of difficult concepts, that can tie it back to the overall business goals and values, right? If you don't have good security leadership, you're sunk. I'll tell you that right now. You may have the best security engineer or architect or hire the best external company or something. You don't have good leadership, you will eventually lose.
Absolutely. And security leadership gets to the heart of what you are excellent at, but also it's what we touched on, and that is that translating of the complex technical components, systems, etc., into what it means to a non-technical business leader. Because that art, that making it succinct, making it brief, making it impactful, there's great sophistication in that, in my opinion. And that is where security leadership has its stake at the C-suite.
And that ability, I mean, if you're really technical, you can get so far in protecting an organization. The simple fact is, cybersecurity is not completely owned, run, and managed by just the security team. It takes collaboration. You have to have different business group leaders also agree. You know, HR has to say, yeah, I want my HR records to stay confidential. Finance has to say, hey, I want to make sure somebody doesn't move a decimal point, right? A hacker doesn't do that. You also need to have the CEO and the board buy in. And they're probably not cybersecurity savvy. So you have to translate the value of security investment into business speak, right? So they can understand and go, okay, yeah, that supports my share of market. That is going to help me maintain my margins. Yes, that is, you know, and so
that helps. That will help EBITDA, right? That'll help us achieve our EBITDA goals by this. And a lot of cybersecurity guys are like, I don't know what EBITDA is, right? Like they don't understand the business aspect. Right.
Yeah, a lot of my colleagues now are making that turn, and they're going to get their MBAs. Right. It's great that you're a CISO, but you start tying that in with MBAs, and you can talk, revenue and goals and margin, and you can give an example and work with the product teams to go, hey, I know we've got a freemium model, but let's explore adding security and move, you know, that pulls people from the freemium to the tier 1 paid model.
Right.
Wow, you're helping us generate revenue? Yes,
exactly,
I will.
Exactly. Well, because different models of offerings and products, they can have enhanced security, enhanced features, and people will pay a premium for it.
Security is now becoming a purchase criteria because people are tired of, you know, data breaches, and they're tired of the systems going down and being unavailable. And they're like, no, I want something that I can trust. So that curve is going up. The expectations in our industry are just going up. Whether it be the regulators, whether it be the boards, whether it be the executive peers, right? The leaders of the profit centers within the organization, whether it be the customers, suppliers, vendors, partners, right? Your insurance agency has higher expectations this year of your cyber posture than it did last year, and that's going to go up.
Yep.
Right.
So again, leadership, you need to be able to see, right, not the accident behind you, but what's coming at you, right? You have to be able to look ahead.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. How has the industry overall, and I want to ask you in your experience too, how have they come along in measuring certain levels of cybersecurity risk? Because We talk with business leaders a lot. And whenever we bring up security, they're always like, here's the problem I have with security. Not that I don't need the layers, not that I don't understand that it will reduce risk, but that people in the security field cannot quantify it for me. Mm-hmm. Everybody else can. HR can say 8% of our organization is out there looking for a job. Sales can say, we're going to miss our target by 14%. Everybody can name it. And then security goes medium risk. High risk.
It's a yellow.
And they're like, I don't know what to do with that. Right. Like, I don't know what to do with yellow. Right. I can't go to the board and be like, we just invested, 4.3 million. Yeah. We're at yellow. We were at red before. It doesn't mean anything to them, right?
No, you're absolutely right. It is one of the toughest aspects of cybersecurity.
It is.
And the reality is, right, just inherently, it's tough for us to do a quantification measurement.
It really is. I've read books on it, and I'm like, holy cow, like the books are painful because I'm like doing the charts and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much math. It was painful. It was hurting my head.
Successful, bad things didn't happen. How do you measure something that didn't happen?
Yep.
It's exactly right.
That is the fundamental crux. Yeah, you don't necessarily know what they would have done. Would they have gone in and just said, cool, I'm in, and left? Would they have gone in and then destroyed everything in the company? You just don't know. So again, trying to measure something that does not happen is extraordinarily difficult. And yet, there are some opportunities, right? We can look, so for example, in physics. In physics, you can measure temperature, right? Well, you can't actually measure cold.
Correct.
All you can measure is heat. Right? So you can't measure darkness. All you can measure is light. So there are things that we already kind of know in other aspects that we have to look at. Now, I'll tell you right now, cybersecurity metrics has come a long way from 20 years ago. But we are nowhere near where we want to be. We can show many more insights and complex calculations, qualitative to quantitative transfers and everything else. But at the end of the day, there's just kind of a lot of magic involved, right? And every methodology is a little different. We make steps forward. There's some brilliant people in the cybersecurity metrics field. And again, for 25 years, they've been working on this. The brightest minds. Oh, but none of them will say, oh, yeah, we figured it out. None of them.
Exactly.
Right? The only people you will hear say that are salespeople. And they're
I was going to say, the only time I see it, the only time I see it out there are vendors saying, if you buy our SIM platform, we'll be able to reduce it. And here is your why. And
I'm like, we can tell you how much you saved, right? And that's immediately when I turn it off and go, no, you're done. You're either
because I'm like,
so
come on.
ignorant that you don't even understand my industry. We're done. I never want to talk to you again. Goodbye.
Right.
Yeah. Such a challenge. Well, we'll come back as they develop more. We'll come back in a couple of years and we'll sit down and we'll go, now we've got this formula, right? We can start putting it in, North Korea, Russia have a different scale, and it all depends on what's going to be, what the attack level.
Actually, I'm going to be
there's so many variables.
Writing a paper on some of the newer techniques and kind of where I see it's going to go in the next few years. Again, it's not being solved in the next few years, right?
No.
But again, it's about baby steps, just like physics, science, everything else. You learn a little bit more, you get a little bit better, you iterate, and you're in a better place after a while. But it takes a lot of teamwork across the entire industry to really move the needle.
So I'd like to segue to something that I'm fascinated by, and that is deepfakes. Oh yeah, man, they've gotten really good in the last 6 months to a year. I mean, we looked at them a couple years ago, and I'm like, all right. I'm like, it's still years away. In the last few months, I have seen some that are just undetectable. I've been in a room with 20, 30 people. Nobody could detect it. And I'm like, wow, that is really scary. What is the impact and the risk that you're seeing? I mean, obviously, we've heard certain breaches because it's being used in conjunction with other social engineering,
Sure.
tactics.
Absolutely.
What do you see is going to be some of the fallout because of this kind of? It's not a new tactic, but it is a greatly improved tactic.
So, and we predicted all this was going to happen, and we mapped it against the exponential rise in technology when you look at LLMs and specifically, deep learning and so forth. So we knew this was coming. And it is very sensationalized because it's great eye candy. Right. So you're going to see it on the news because it's sexy. It's going to grab eyeballs and everything. Okay. But from a practical level, it's just another tool.
Right. It's right.
So the objectives of the attacker are staying the same, right? They're just using another tool to achieve that. Now, there are counters to tools, but the reality is when we're looking at these things, because they are getting good and it's exponentially good. We got multimodal now. It's not just a picture. It's not just a video. It's not just a video and voice. It's not just a video and voice. It's also live. Mannerisms, so on and so forth, biometrics or synthetic biometrics, and all these other things, right? So it's going to get more and more and more complex. There are technologies organizations are working on to help detect those, but it is an arms race. Every time somebody comes out and says, hey, we can detect 95% of it, very shortly thereafter, and I'm not talking years, I'm talking hours, days, or sometimes a week or two, the attackers come out with a new model that drops to nothing, right? So it's just constant, back and forth. And we've seen big companies actually pull back and go, you know what, we're not going to try and create a detection mechanism. Meta pulled back, Google pulled back largely. They've still got a couple of small ones. As it turns out, history is a great lesson, right? A great teacher and provides great lessons. Let's turn the dial back to the days of when people took photographs with film, right? And all of a sudden you had digital photographs and people could edit those. And there was upheaval going, my gosh, we have to outlaw this because you could put aliens in this picture. You can do this. You can make somebody look different, younger, older, like they're standing next to somebody they shouldn't, right? This is technology. Say, okay, well, we'll try to build some tools to identify them. And that never worked. What worked was a fundamental shift in people's mentality going, I am so used to fake images. In fact, just about every image you will see in a newspaper or magazine is fake in some way. It's airbrushed. It's this, it's that. Now it's completely created digitally, right? But we have trained ourselves to go, I don't trust that. I know that's really not what that person looks like.
So we have to verify it through an independent
with
channel.
deep fakes.
Right.
Yep.
So, but it's a matter of our own behavioral changes, right? You guys remember the day, right, when people thought, hey, if it's on the internet, it must be true.
I mean, Abe Lincoln
nowadays, you're like, it's on the internet, it's probably false, absolutely false. But it's a mentality change that will actually save us. That is the natural evolution of the individual to not be victimized. But we have to go through that learning process.
That's excellent.
So we're going to suffer for a little while.
Yep. Makes absolute perfect sense. You mentioned in our prep session that there were some upcoming regulations and some in the UK on licensing and question whether the US will follow. Do you recall that conversation? Or do you?
So there's some AI regulations that Europe has created. And again, the EU has been kind of at the forefront for a lot of these different things, whether it be competitiveness in the digital space, whether it be privacy, right? GDPR, several iterations of that. The United States always says, hey, we have an interest in it, but it's been very difficult to get all the states united or a federal umbrella to say, these are the guardrails. Even today, we do not have a single federal privacy law. There are
we
52 different privacy laws, 52 or 54. Every state has a different one, and then even some of the outlying territories have their own.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no unified set of rules. We've already seen the White House come out and say, hey, here's some guidelines. We want to have some rules, but nothing has been overarching or put into law or hard regulations yet. We hope that it'll get there. But EU has definitely taken the plunge much early. They've created some very advanced, thorough regulations around AI, which is good, just as thorough as the privacy stuff that they've worked on. Yep. And they got it out there faster. It took a while for them to get from the EU 94, 95 directives to actually GDPR. On the AI side, they moved much, much faster. Mm-hmm. So hopefully the US will also move faster.
Is that because, I was just talking to a CISO who's actually from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, but he's been based in the UK for the last 25 years. And he said, it is fundamentally different here. I've lived in both countries for years, and he's like, it's fundamentally different. People are serious over here about their personal privacy. Like they believe their online privacy is a fundamental human right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and he shared a story where his sister went to a ball game, and to get a bat, like a giveaway bat, they had to take a swab of her DNA so that she could, sign up for like Ancestry or some genealogy. Americans, only Americans view like I'm going to give you my body and my whole family history if I can get that bat.
If I can get it,
right? We're like, curating our lives, showing our like background of our houses and our kids and our families on social media and stuff, and they just are much more careful over there.
It's a culture thing.
It is really a culture. That's fact, what I was asked.
Within
That's
EU,
what I wanted to ask.
Privacy is a basic human right.
Yeah.
In the United States, that is not in our Constitution.
No,
it is not in our amendments. Yeah. Individual states have now come out and actually put privacy in their state constitution. California was one of the first.
I remember that
said, hey, privacy is a constitutional right for California citizens. Right? But we don't have that. And I think we have done a very poor job in training each other and our children, the next generation, how important privacy is. Now, in Europe, it goes back to World War II, to some horrific things that happen. But we've seen very similar things happen in Arab Spring, for example, where a lack of privacy in social media allowed oppressive governments to literally identify people going in the streets and peacefully protesting, right, for human rights or for freedoms or whatnot, peacefully protesting, but they were able to identify them, and people started disappearing at nights, right? Government teams would come in, black teams would come in, and come, or not wrong terminology, but secretive police teams would come in the middle of the night and kick open the door and take people never to be seen again. And again, you've got.
I wonder if it's because we haven't experienced something like that in modern.
We've been fortunate. We've been very fortunate about that.
9/11 notwithstanding, we haven't had attacks like that.
Yes,
where the government turns on you and starts coming in your house based on your religion or whatever, and you're like, well, I wish I had my personal views private. Well, you've been showing them on TikTok for 3 years, so right. I mean, and hopefully something like that doesn't have to happen ever for us to turn the tide on that.
The more we share. And in our country now, there's a lot in regards to political views, no matter what side or, you are on the spectrum. There are fringe groups out there going, well, if I know that you are different than what I believe, I can now target you. I can put you on a list. I can track. I can look up your information, and I can do some horrible things. Not only to embarrass you, but financially to crush you and impact you.
To sway a vote.
I can send SWAT teams to your house and have them kick in your door. So, and it can get worse than that, by the way, guys. If I start messing with your medical records, let's change their blood type. Every time you go to the emergency room, you're going to have you already started a bad day if you're in the emergency room.
Right.
But I guarantee you it's going to be much, much worse.
Wow.
Right. Unbelievable.
So yeah, it can get dark. I don't mean to get too dark, but
no, man,
yeah.
I'm telling
this
you,
is what I think about all day long. Yeah,
yeah, I know, but you have got some of the best insight I have seen, man. It is just outstanding. So you are famous for a lot of things, but you are famous for making your predictions, and a lot of vendors, when they make their predictions, I'm like, I predict people will buy more product from us. Okay, that's cool.
Hey, bad things will happen. That's my prediction.
Bad things with box, right? I'm like, okay. But here, you had, for 2024, for the year that we're in right now, and we're at the end of June, smack dab in the middle of the year, you had top 10 cybersecurity predictions that you made at the end of 2023. Nation state attack dominance, critical infrastructure targets, supply chain hacking methods will increase, more vulnerabilities and exploits in heavily used business products. Generative AI becomes a double-edged sword.
That sounds like I really know what I'm talking about. Oh, I like this list.
Did you new cyber regulations force operational changes? Greater visibility of cybersecurity will create fear, but drive better ownership. I want to ask you about that.
I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, rising expectations of trust will crush weak cybersecurity strategies. Love that one. Resource constraints mutate from fears to nightmares. Absolutely. And cybersecurity responsibilities increase in scope and push organizations to adapt. How are those predictions doing so far this year?
Well, I'm biased. You can't ask Mark.
What's your
what do you
record
think?
for the
Does
year,
it sound
Matthew?
like states are attacking or critical infrastructures are going down? Is healthcare being targeted? Is a car today in the Midwest? Are you do that?
Is down. Healthcare, critical infrastructure aren't being touched. AI is just a fad. What a
fad! It's a fad.
It's just
Nobody's
fad.
using that.
Yeah, nobody's using that.
Going to go the way of the Velcro wallet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I had one of those.
I've still got one.
It was. Do you keep it by your pet rock? Mark?
Yeah,
rock?
You're gonna have to
down. Let me get some. Read some tea leaves for us.
Okay.
About the next 6 months, year and a half. What do you think is going to? I mean, we have an election year coming up, so a lot of misinformation I anticipate will happen, right? But where do you think things are going? Are there any new waves coming? What do you foresee?
Well, a lot of everything that I talked about before is going to continue to progress. It's none of those things are just going to level off. Okay, we kind of have it under control, right? It's not. It's going to get more problematic, right? So all those different trends are going to happen. We are seeing nation states not only right now. We're witnessing the result of a huge amount of investment, and for some of them, some slight reorganization. As we see international events potentially take a turn. So, for example, China, one of the big four aggressive nation states, dominantly their cyber attacks have been to harvest information, intellectual property, secrets, military designs, industrial designs, right? A huge amount of effort around economic espionage, which is just a fancy word for state-sponsored industrial espionage. If there were a war in the South China Sea, with between, let's say the reunification of Taiwan, right, we would probably see a major shift from simply trying to obtain intellectual property, competitive information, things of that sort to build their economy up and companies within their country, to something more destructive, to something to more impactful into our critical infrastructures, right? They would want to dissuade and to have material impact on any potential support, whether it be militarily, economically, industry,
supply chain,
or even just via the social media and collaborating with other countries around the world in unified voices. They're going to want to use cyber to disrupt that. So cyber attacks become a tool. Right now, it's a tool for economic growth and everything else.
Yep.
If other actions happen, it's going to be in support of whatever their national initiatives are.
Yeah.
We're going to see stuff like that if that comes to fruition. We're going to see, again, the rise of AI. And let's keep in mind, right, AI is a massive umbrella. With AI, you have machine learning, which is one little branch of it.
Right.
Within machine learning, you have deep learning. And within deep learning, you have LLMs and, things like generative AI, right? And so we're seeing this tiny little sliver of what eventually will be massive. And other branches of AI are gaining speed and momentum. So we will see eventually more of those come into play, probably not in the next 6 months. But as we roll out more and more and more over time, over the next many years, we'll see that. And then other disruptive technologies like quantum computing. Well,
that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about.
Just throw a wrench into the system. Monkey wrench, bananas, bring it all, right?
And for those that don't, that aren't necessarily technical, what we're talking about is the way we protect a lot of data is through encryption. We hear that phrase, right? It's coded in a way, there's a wrapper around it, for lack of a better phrase. Quantum breaks that wrapper. It cuts
some of those wrappers.
Some of those wrappers.
It undermines a lot of the asymmetric keys, not the symmetric keys, but the asymmetric ones. Yes. I don't want to create too much fear, right? Because there's already realism
ways
here. Our current algorithms, resist the current types of computing attacks. No algorithm is bulletproof, by the way. Eventually, no matter how strong it is, it can be broken. But encryption is about keeping it secure for a period of time. So NIST already has 4 primary and I think 2 backups, if I remember right. So it's a matter of transitioning, but that's a lot of infrastructure. Right. If you remember year 2000, everybody was panicked. We have to change all this COBOL programming and everything else. It's going to kind of be like that if people don't start shifting now to the new algorithms. It'll be we have to do everything at once. Because once you have the quantum computers that have the necessary qubits to do those calculations,
there'll be a lot of damage
like
done
Shor's
in the
algorithm.
Short term. There'll be a lot of damage done in the short term.
Yeah, I can crack passwords. I can crack encryption. I can read all those messages. And oh, by the way, I have been storing all of those messages in encrypted formats just for the day when I get the quantum computer. I've got nation state on our own.
I didn't even think about that. Think of all of the data that's been data that's been taken that is online on the dark web.
I'm now going to decrypt it and see what you've been talking about and everything else. It's massive.
Wow.
And this has been going on for years. Yeah. And some people ask, right, when you get a nation state attacker, China or something else going in to steal intellectual property, they'll ask, why did they steal all this encrypted data? They can't decrypt it. My answer is
yet.
They can't decrypt it yet. They're like, you mean they would? Yep.
Yes. Yep. Oh, man.
Unbelievable. Well,
food for thought for you. Hopefully I made your afternoon a little bit rosier.
This is a great cliffhanger.
No, I mean, thank you so much for your time today. Like, this was just a remarkable view and insight from everything that you've seen. Like, you really solidified a lot of our beliefs and you opened our eyes to a lot of things. It was really fantastic. What's on the horizon for you? Do you have public speaking engagements? I know you do a lot of everything.
Yeah, I've got keynotes coming up. I know I'm in. Where the heck? I was in Helsinki. I was in Paris. I think I've done 3 trips to Austin. I think I got another trip to Austin that's coming up. But I'm all over the place. I mean, you can always go out to my website and see online and in-person speaking engagements. So
absolutely, we'll have a link to that. We'll link to that in the show notes for sure, and we encourage everybody to check out Matthew Rosenquist.
Follow me on LinkedIn too, because I'll post it out there. And if you like hearing my blitherings about cybersecurity, I can flood your feed.
Hey, I will tell you, you have mastered what we've been trying to do in this podcast the whole time, and that is just to translate it. Right? Is really just to break down, especially all the news, because when we sit with business leaders, they're like, I hear about this breach. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Like they're like, what does that mean for me? And like, well, because this breach happened like this, what are you doing for that? Like, do you have a vulnerability there? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, what are you doing for it? Have you prepared? And usually the answer is no. And so, that's where the education comes in. That's where we're all on the same side, just trying to protect.
And that's what I do a lot of side work is, I'm a fractional CISO and sort of on demand. And I've got several, clients that keep me on retainer. So when they do have a question, right, and whether it's their CISO or their board or their C-suite, they can pick up the phone or they can schedule a meeting and go, hey, explain what we just saw on the news. What should we be doing? Or we're doing this. Is this enough? Is this not enough? What are we, right? And it many times it helps getting an expert from the outside that may know more, right? It may have other feelers out there that can kind of fill in some of the blanks and give some recommendations and sometimes raise red flags and going, whoa, you misinterpreted that.
I'm a firm believer in organizations realizing that they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And to rely on resources like yourself that see a lot of different things, that cross different industries, right? I think that so often certain organizations just stay within a very niche hole and they don't see what's going on around them. And so raising
security is a teamwork sport.
It is.
Right? It requires a vast diversity, and that's how we're stronger.
Right.
Is leveraging everybody out there because we do want to help. We do, it's all of us against the bad guys.
Right. Yeah. And again, we have to be right every time. They only have to be
right once.
So, well, thank you so much, Matthew Rosenquist. Thank you, sir. Good. Great discussion. Thank you. And we will see everybody on the next one. Well, that wraps this up. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our episode. The next one is coming right up. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast and downloading on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for watching.